Good morning, Latanya.
Good morning, Alicia. How are you?
I am good. I am thinking that this is the first one of these I've ever recorded in the morning because most of my guests are in the US. So I
Yeah.
have time to have at least 2 to 3 coffees before I have one of these recordings.
So
So
you
I
need,
actually need an extra shot
I
today,
was about to
I
say you
think.
didn't have an extra shot. Oh boy, let's see how this goes.
I'm a very slow starter in the morning. I'd managed to get up, get my children out of the house, but my husband takes
Mhm.
them to school. So I don't get out of pajamas for quite some time if I don't have to. And I like almost never put on mascara before 9 o'clock. So this was a big deal. This is all for you because I'm so
Well,
excited that you're here.
so appreciate that. And I too had to roll out. I'm still on US time, although I'm, in England dropping a kid off at college.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that we managed to be in the same time zone. And you
That's
said
right.
this is your last child drop off at
The
college.
youngest, yeah. And so my partner and I, between us, have four children, and this is the youngest. So we are officially empty
Oh
nesters.
my God. Are you feeling like great? Are you feeling really emotional? It's probably all the things, isn't it? Or do you feel old hat?
All
You've
of
done
it.
this 3 times before. You're like, whatever.
Nope, it's different. I think knowing that you still have a child or two in the pipeline, makes you kind of still stay in mommy mode. Now, I don't know. I mean, what you never stop doing the mommy thing is what I understand from my mother, but I do, all of the other stuff, the school stuff, all the things that make up, the social life around your children. That I'm kind of like thinking, oh boy, this is going to be the first time in 25 years. So it will be interesting.
It's going to be exciting, but I'm pretty sure you're going to find a way to fill your time because you have a lot on your plate.
That's
You
right.
are an incredibly accomplished woman. You have written this amazing book that we're going to talk about today, The Everyday Feminist, which I just loved.
Thank you.
And you're like, oh yeah, I'm in the UK. I have a board meeting. I have, you're gonna be
Yeah,
you're gonna be fine. Okay.
that's true.
You're gonna be fine. So
Thank
at the
you.
in the prelude to your book, which is or the prologue, I guess, which is written by Cecile
Mhm.
Richards, she calls you a
Yes,
great listener.
yes,
But today
yes.
I want you to be a great talker. That's what we're doing
Okay.
today. And I want to hear all about it. So your book came out earlier this year. Well, first
Yeah.
of all, like how has it been? How is the process of like putting a book into the world? Was this your first book?
It is
Yes.
my first
Okay.
book, and my intention was not to write about myself at all. The intention originally, what I was trying to sell to the publishers, was a book about my organization, Global Fund for Women.
Right.
And it morphed into this after several conversations with publishers over at Wiley who wanted to do something with me, but did not want to do a book about an organization. And
Right.
so they kept calling me back, and we're like, but do something about you. And I originally thought they meant a memoir, but they were open, they said, so it's this kind of like fun thing, writing about yourself, but writing about it in the context of what you really, really believe
Mm.
and where you're seen as a thought leader publicly. And so bringing that together took me talking about myself and finding my voice and what I wanted to put out into the world as far as these amazing women that I've met around the world. But then it was also this part about interviewing those who I believe are incredible examples for all of us and putting that together with some thought leadership. And then finally, what was the ask? What did you want people to do at the end of that book? So that was the process, and it took longer than I would have thought. I thought I had a lot that I could just whip out, but I think I have this. Well, you've written a book. I don't think it's ever as easy as you think,
Yeah.
and but that process I think makes something really special come out.
Of the different elements, so the kind of personal memoir, the stories about your life and your incredible upbringing, the stories about the everyday feminists who you profile in the book, and then
Mm.
the kind of more sort of, it's almost like movement building 101 and
Mhm.
intersectionality 101. It's like this great primer for all of these incredible concepts that we hear a lot about. And if you don't work in the kind of social good or philanthropy or women and girls space, you
Mhm.
still hear a lot about them. What of those three parts did you find the easiest to write and what was the hardest?
Boy, so the easiest part was that kind of, movement 101. It's because it was, think about it as if you're like in school right now. It's
Yeah.
almost like the class, I'm studying that every day. I'm trying to engage. I'm trying to figure out, what does it mean to be a social movement? What does that mean when you're talking about things like racial justice and gender justice, and other social issues, climate justice? And how are they the same? How are they different? And so that's the kind of life I'm living right
Yeah.
now. So that was the easiest part, because I'm learning that. I'm reading all this stuff and I can bring it into the conversation. After that was just sort of the interviews with people like Loretta Ross and,
That's amazing.
Tarana Burton, and Miriam, Marimbe. Those were conversations that, not only were easy, were actually just so motivating.
Yeah.
I mean, these women always drop these gems, and, right in the middle of something, and you're like, oh, yes, let me get that,
Pull that
so.
quote out.
So that was the fun part. And actually I had a student do the interviews themselves, because I had conversations with these women, and the suggestion was from the publishers is have someone else actually interview them, so you don't lose anything. Because
Yeah.
when I mean, you probably know, when you're talking to people, you kind of get engaged in it, right? You're having this conversation, but if you might miss something that they say. So I had a wonderful student, Olivia, do the interviews themselves, and
Wow.
I just had the initial conversation. So it was great going through that stuff and picking up all those gems.
And you share so many very personal things about your upbringing, about your family and the story. Can
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit about that journey to becoming the president and CEO of the Global Fund for Women, and also what it felt like to put that out there for the world?
Well, I'll tell you, Alisha, a little story, because you're writing about yourself, but you forget that. Well, I guess you don't really think about how other people saw it, and there's always this thing about what you remember, as opposed to like your sister or your mother.
Yeah.
And so when I had the memoir finally done and felt good about it, I sent it to my mother and my sister and a couple best friends. And my mother called me in the middle of the night. I mean, we just only had the 3 hour time difference, but she was up late, so she called me about 3:30 in the morning, and she was like, you can't print that. And that was chapter 4.
Oh,
Because, I talk about the violence in the home that I grew up in.
yeah.
And the honest truth is that once my mother finally left my dad, we never talked about it again. We, like, each other in the family, never had a conversation about it, and we certainly didn't share that with anyone else outside of the family. And so this was the first time I really talked about it, and I just really thought it was important, Alisha, to include that, because I think people sometimes think about why people are in these social movements, and why it's important. And I talk about the spark in chapter 2, like, how do social movements start? And it's personal.
Yeah.
And so I felt it was necessary to talk about why I'm in this. And that was personal. But it's my mom's story, and
Yeah.
I forgot that. And so I told her, oh my God, her reaction. I was like, I'm not going to print it then. I'll replace that chapter. I had some other ones, and many other ones that kind of fell out. And I told her I had another one that I could put in. And she called me back, let's say 6 a.m. So 3 hours later. And she said, you got to print it. She's like,
That's incredible.
totally 360 in 3 hours. She finished the book that night. She read it in one night, and she came back and she said, you have to, it is so important to the book.
Yeah.
And she said, and to be honest, she felt like it was my story to tell. She said, this is not for me to hide. And she actually felt good. She thought about people at church, her best friends, who she has best friends who didn't even know what she went through.
Wow.
And so that was just it was a process for us, both of us, to put it out there. And the first time I read it, Alisha, because I've been doing readings with the book, was
Right.
at the Rockefeller Foundation. And I was quite nervous about doing it, but I just thought it was so important. I usually read the intro
Mm.
or some other section of the book, but that was the first time I did it. And it was so well received. people, I mean, literally, were coming up to me afterwards, talking about their own stories and their own lives, and just really appreciative of me sharing that part. So I now feel a lot easier about it, but
Yeah.
every time you relive, what is a very difficult part of your life and part of yourself, and it gets easier as you go along, and very therapeutic, honestly.
I imagine it is. I mean, I have certainly found one of the best things about writing a memoir is that you kind of put your like most, the inner self that a lot of people don't see, the things you might be a little bit ashamed about, the secrets, whatever they might be. And then you find when you're starting to hear from readers that other people have had those experiences, and you sharing them empowers them to share their own story or think about it in a
Yeah,
different way. I mean, it's like pretty amazing. I think that
it
is
is.
able to happen. And it really feels like a gift because it can be so hard to air anything out. And I mean, my family, my dad's side of the family has this text like chat group. And
Mhm.
anytime I write anything, my dad sends it. And inevitably it gets like 45 responses. No, no, that's not right. We didn't leave Cuba in 66. We left Cuba in 65.
Right,
No, no, no.
yes.
Your grandmother was wearing brown shoes that day. I'm absolutely sure. But there's always a battle about it.
I
And
love
so
that.
now I'm just like, okay, try my best
Yeah.
to get the facts, and then I'm not going to text the group because I got to put them on mute sometimes.
I definitely got that from my friends. They were like, "That was not in that year, and you were dating such and such after this," and, you're like, "Okay."
It's pretty funny. Now,
Yeah.
when you were growing up, did you consider yourself a feminist? Is that a word that you used to describe yourself?
Yeah, no, the whole word feminist was difficult for me growing up, because I think that initial time, and I probably was like still in grade school, but like maybe sixth grade, doing a report on the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment in the
Mhm.
U.S. And that's where I first read that word, and the description of it, and the people that are sort of behind the Gloria Steinems and others. And so but my grandmother, when I was reading it, I thought of her. And so I went to go talk to her. And I'm like, "Are you a feminist?" And she's like, she literally just stared at me. I was like, "Hell no. What?" She's like, "No, feminists are not like us. They're like white people that
Yeah.
live on, they live on the east side, and they have a lot of money, and they don't have to do much. We're people that have to work, and we can't be feminists." And I was like, "Oh,
Wow.
okay." And
Okay,
everything
great.
she said
Thanks
was
for
like,
clearing that
"Yeah,
up.
that's what it is." And so that was the impression that I always had. And although I've worked within this setting for a long time, I never really encountered. So the other thing the book did for me, and ultimately why I named it that, was gave me another definition of feminist. Because to be frank with you, throughout my career, the women I met were more like my grandmother and less like a Gloria Steinem.
Yes.
So, and of course, my love with Sojourner Truth, and who, now looking through a lot of history, is quintessentially, the probably one of the
Yeah.
first feminists in the world,
Yeah.
who actually helped, with the terminology to popularize it. And of course, her story is amazing, and coming out now. I think there's actually maybe a Netflix special. So, for me, it was like trying to battle my relationship with that word based
Yeah.
on what my grandmother told me and what I've seen and what I've learned and what I know. And so for me, it's a bit of reclaiming the truth of that word in its real definition.
I think one of the amazing things you do in the book is that you describe so many people, and then you sort of finished with, X is an everyday feminist, Innocent is an everyday feminist, Elaine is an everyday feminist. And it it kind of blows open this narrow definition of what it has to be. I think you've really succeeded in that because you're also bringing in indigenous rights activists and racial justice activists and all sorts of people, whether they fit neatly into what that kind of Gloria Steinem ideal is. So
Yeah.
I think you do a really good job of making that word feel more inclusive. And in fact, making the book feel inclusive and feel like it is, there's room for everybody to come in and be part of this movement. And it's like a hopeful and
Yeah.
optimistic book. I think I got that after it. I sometimes read books about our wider sector and feel very depressed. And that was not the case when reading your book. So thanks for that. I'm
And
grateful.
not even with the interviews, right? One thing I've learned, and just a characteristic of everyday feminists, is that you can't harp on the past because it's going to make getting to the future very difficult.
Yeah.
These are women who have experienced a great deal of stress and hardship, but who keep seeing the possibility. So for me, that is, again, is the everyday feminist. Is what my grandmother was. Yes, it's been hard. Yes, it's been difficult, but we see a tomorrow that looks a whole lot better. We see a tomorrow that's much more equal, much more hopeful. So I'm glad that you got that out the book, because I think that, again, that is what an everyday feminist is. It's not about, going down to the courthouse and, like having a law passed or any of that. That's great. But the process of changing how you feel about, inequality, how you feel about some stress, as a human race, we can change, and we can become better. And I think we are.
Do you feel like that optimism, that kind of hope is what keeps you going on the tough days? Because there are,
Yeah.
even in the book, but certainly in your wider work, some really difficult moments, some sad stories. And, the business of justice is never linear. It's never a path that's just going upwards. Sometimes the wins are hard to find. I mean, what do you do just personally to like make sure you're staying in it and not wanting to pull away or back out?
So it's a great point. I don't allow it to get that way, but I am becoming very grounded. Just trying to hone in on my practices around meditation and yoga, and actually realizing how important they was. I think I started yoga just so I could, as a form of exercise, so
I know.
that I can keep in shape,
I'm like, we get to
never
lie
realized.
down at the end of this. That sounds great.
Exactly. And still be strong and
Exactly.
have a nice
I
tight
just
butt.
worked out.
Yes, exactly. So I am now only understanding that because of that practice, I probably have been able to stay so grounded for so long. I've been doing it a while now, but now I've included meditation into it. And then so moving, that kind of movement has become very important for me. But I'm realizing that I have the power of my perception. So when I wake up each day, I really try hard to focus on what is the good path. What are the good things that I can do to not just help the world, but to help myself, energize in some ways, recharge the battery. And I do it, intentionally every single morning, just to get me ready to think about what's wonderful. It's wonderful that my child is going off to school. I will miss them incredibly, but I am so happy for the journey and what we've been through together. So it's just how you can look at it. That's what I
Extraordinary.
focus on.
Here
Yeah.
you are dropping all these little pearls of wisdom that I'm going to be pulling out of this podcast left and right. I mean, that is like my eternal struggle with my children, to try to get them to understand that the only thing they really can control is how they face the world every day and how they show up for people and how they show up for the things they care about, because there are so many other things that are out of their control. But when they're being dragged out of bed by the ankles sometimes at 7 a.m., they don't quite see it that way. All right, you have to indulge me for a second in getting like a little bit philanthropy wonky, because this is a subject that is important to me.
Sure.
And I couldn't actually believe, like reading your book, which was just written quite recently, that we're still at this horrible statistic of women's organizations receiving less than 1% of funding from the global philanthropic community. I started working in this space in 2005, and I'm pretty sure maybe it was like point something, but I'm kind of shocked that that number has not changed and shifted. And the facts are there. The return on investment of investing in women and what is going to happen to the world when you do, it's all there. What do you think it's going to take to move the needle in a significant way from where we are right now?
Well, and I'll just say, Alicia, that I was looking at the difference between the 22 and the 21 numbers for OECD. And so, but that's broader than the philanthropic community. That's
Mhm.
sort of all money that's being
Right.
transferred from the global north to the global south. And so we're trending down, you know, slightly, but we're already so small. That's a hard
Right.
thing to do. Uh, yeah. So we're not just trending down on, and those numbers are talking about, you know, support that goes to grassroots women's organizations specifically. But
Mhm.
if you look overall at gender equality, in which, you know, governments and philanthropies get to list anything that has to do with women, you know, in general, that's still trending down. And so I am a little bit concerned. And part of what I am thinking, you know, to the question, what do we have to do, is we are going to have to start holding people accountable. I think right now, you know, we go through this thing where if it's sexy, we kind of like, you know, everybody talks about it. Everybody's, you know, we're localization and, you know, women this or racial that. And so people sort of create the narrative, but then don't see it through.
Mhm.
They pivot and start. And right now we're in an interesting place, right? So, you know, and I'll talk specifically about the, you know, just about a little case of what's going on in the US around boards, serving on boards.
Mhm.
So there was in California, you know, with all the corporations talking about, you know, adding more women, adding more people of color to their boards, there was sort of a movement to try to make that happen, thinking about ESG and the benefit of having diversity for so many reasons that we don't even need to talk about.
Mhm.
But then that case was challenged and it was shot down. And there was so both, you know, first the race, you know, having a diverse racial, at least, and I think it was like you need at least one person on your board that comes from
Wow.
a background, right?
Thank
And
you.
then the other one was like at least one woman, you know, both of those got shot down. And then we had the affirmative action case. So you could see where it's going, right? And that was
Mhm.
academia, but now I heard that there was a letter that was sent to the top 100, you know, firms in the US, talking about this issue of ESG and diversity in hires and stuff like that, to kind of scare them, I guess, you know. But these are people from with power, who are writing these letters. And so from an organization that, let's say in 2020, you know, less than 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe, started, you know, really a journey, because it's a journey
Mhm.
towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, and thinking about ESG as a part of how they deliver on their corporate, governmental,
Right.
whatever, you know, academia promises. And now they're starting to sort of back down. And I think this is now the time when we push forward, because I think it's only in the times of when things are looking fairly bad that you have the opportunity to really lean in. So we have all of the statements, we have all of the promises, almost to the dollar. You know,
Yeah.
we're going to put 100 million to getting this, you know, to doing that. And I think if we don't really lean in now and hold them to that, at the very least embarrass them
Yeah.
about what they said and what they haven't done, then I think we're going to be in trouble. And I think that is the thing. Everyday feminists, and I'll just go back to the book a little bit,
Mhm.
are constantly doing the work, right?
Mhm.
So it's very difficult for them to kind of look back and say, well, you said you were going to do X and you didn't do it.
Right.
Instead, we're trying to find the new opportunities. We're trying to deliver on what is required for the community right now. So I am very keen
Mhm.
on trying to figure out how we hold that accountability piece strongly, firmly, in order for us to move forward. Because what's happening is that people are okay doing it when it's helpful for them. They're
Right.
not so okay doing it when you're past the moment. And so unless we insist that they do it, and just quickly, Alicia, at the UN, we're trying to do this because we saw at the UN, there's lots of promises that were made for generation equality and all other kind
Mhm.
of things. So it's like 60 billion was dedicated in 2021 towards gender equality. But what happens is they kind of self-report.
Right.
So, you know, my company is like, we're going to put like $500 million towards making sure that women enter the workplace. And then 2, 4, or 5 years later, someone asks, did you do that? And they're like, yes, we did. So what I'm trying to do is change that a little bit, or at least match it. Okay, you can self-report, but now we're actually in 14 countries trying to get civil society to be the ones who answered the
Yeah.
question, did they do it? And not just, asking the government who promised, $1 billion. It's like civil society. Did you feel it? Was there
Yeah.
anything that
Was there
happened?
any
Are
impact on
you,
your
yeah,
life? I
anything,
really love that.
anything at all. So now I just want accountability we change the way we do it. It's not accountability, self-accountability. It's accountability to the people who are actually requiring and needing that support from you.
I love that. And I'm remembering I worked at a big bank in their sustainability team in the
Mm,
late part of the first decade of the 2000s, and
mm,
was helping them write a CGI commitment. At the time,
uh-huh.
CGI was like the big thing, and they were gonna
Yes, yes.
and I remember we were like, what's a big number? What's a really big number that we can put out there? And the commitment they ended up with was educating 1 million people around
Mm,
HIV and AIDS. And uh no one had put any thought into how that was actually going to be executed at all. But 1 million seemed like such a good number
good number.
to
Yeah.
go on stage with. And, I was like 26 years old. And I was just
Mm,
thinking, I'm like, where are the people that are like, where's the person that's going to be like, oh, hey, how are we going to make this happen? Or should we
yeah.
actually commit to this if we're not going to do it? No, there was like nobody there doing that. We were all just like, a million is so great. So I think that accountability piece is so important and feels like a way that people can be supporting the work of everyday feminists, which you talk about
Yes.
in the book.
Yeah.
And you make this really bold statement in the preface, which I loved. You say, not every, and likely not most, everyday feminists will want support directly or indirectly from those that read this book. And it made me immediately think of when Half the Sky came out, and there was
Uh-huh.
all of this like, yes, we're going to support women and girls. We need to pour all of this money into all of these organizations. And there was this kind of trajectory that we were supposed to go on, right? It was like read, feel, and then give. And
Right.
you subvert that in your book.
Mm,
And I want you to explain this to the reader because I think it's important. I think it's fascinating. And I think a lot of very well-meaning people are asking the question now of how can I be a better ally in this movement? So
yes.
what is your answer for them?
Yeah, and it's really really important for us to find our space. But I will tell you from the everyday feminist point of view, they've been burned often. It's so weird. Like people are like, oh, well, there's no, we can't fund them because they don't have enough experience. Their organization has only been here. Most of these women have been doing this for so long, from the time they were, certainly in school. It is not a characteristic that you like wake up at 40 and start, it's like who they are,
Yeah.
and so they've been doing this work, and I think they've been burned often, from the way the system has been set up. And, the systems of oppression that follow, the last few centuries, of, the human
Yes.
life are still very entrenched and very difficult to change. And so many of these everyday feminists, have learned the hard way that taking money from particular organizations, from governments, lead to a string of disasters that they are not interested in engaging in anymore. Deegan Ali, who runs Adesso, talks about this in decolonization. She talks about this a lot. She, on around decolonization, around how their organization took a USAID grant, and they support Somalian refugees in Kenya and other places in Africa. And they went from, doing that 100% of the time to now only doing it 50% of the time, because the other 50% was spent on writing reports and engaging the donor and blah, 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 And so I think, and, from her perspective, it's like, it wasn't worth it. And it was a regret, it meant you expanded the pot. But at the end of the day, you kind of, most of that money was spent on appeasing the needs of the organization that gave you the money. And so that's what I'm trying to look at. And I want you to give, so,
Yeah, don't stop giving.
feel and give, don't stop giving, but change the way you do that. Stop thinking of it as charity, thinking of it more of an investment. And the work that these folks are doing means that you don't really need a whole lot of engagement. You don't need them to report every blah blah blah. You don't need them to count the widgets and the heads and
Yeah.
things like that. So you just have to change the way you see progress happening and what impact means for you and risk, and so those are the things that I'm trying to say in the book, because at the end of the day, if you are going to put a lot of challenges on the everyday feminists to do the work that they're doing, they no longer can do the work. And so be very, very careful that you're not actually doing the opposite of what you think you want it to do.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I love that. Latanya, this has been such an amazing chat. If you are listening to this, you can pick up The Everyday Feminist where books are sold. And there is a fantastic list in the back of the book of some incredible women's funds that you could be putting your money if you're looking to give. And I have just loved this. I'm feeling really good. This was my extra shot. I didn't even need that second coffee.
Oh, get out. That's great. That's a great compliment. Yes, it's been fun, Alisha, and I really appreciate you doing this. And loved, your what if a year concept. I haven't read the book yet, but certainly, I already ordered it because of this conversation, just here, so I didn't get it. But really looking forward to that, and just the idea of going back and doing what you want. I think it's such a characteristic of everyday feminists. So welcome to the club.
Thank you.